Chapter 1. The Return. The Hayes estate hadn't changed much in 5 years. Towering walls, pristine gardens, and an air of untouchable wealth still defined it. But what had changed was the man standing at the entrance, Adrian Sinclair. Nathaniel Hayes, heir to the Hayes-Lennox Group, hadn't expected this. His childhood best friend, the alpha he hadn't seen since that night, now stood before him, dressed in the sharp uniform of a butler, his posture rigid and professional. Adrian's sharp blue eyes met his without hesitation, revealing nothing. "Welcome home, Master Hayes." His voice was even, controlled. Nathaniel's lips curled, stepping closer, closing the distance just enough to test boundaries. "Didn't expect to see you here." Adrian didn't flinch. "A lot has changed, sir." Nathaniel scoffed. "Clearly." His fingers twitched, tempted to reach out, to touch, to shake him, to demand answers. But Adrian gave nothing away. Their last meeting had ended in disaster. Tension, alcohol, and a kiss neither of them should have shared. Then, Adrian disappeared. Now, he was back, standing rigid and obedient, as if they had never been equals. As if he wasn't an alpha standing before another alpha. And Nathaniel hated it. Chapter 2. Power Plays. Nathaniel wasn't one to let things slide. If Adrian wanted to act like the past didn't exist, then fine. Nathaniel would remind him exactly what they had been. That night, he found Adrian in the study, stacking books with his usual precision. The room was dim, the fireplace casting flickering shadows across Adrian's sharp features. Nathaniel leaned against the desk, arms crossed. "So, you're just going to pretend we don't have history?" Adrian didn't look up. "We don't have history, Master Hayes. We have a past. There's a difference." Nathaniel pushed off the desk, closing the distance in 3 slow steps. He reached out, fingers brushing against Adrian's wrist as he took a book from his grasp. The touch was light, fleeting, testing. Adrian inhaled sharply but didn't pull away. "Don't do that," Nathaniel murmured, his voice dropping. "Don't act like you feel nothing." Adrian's throat bobbed. "I serve your family now. That's all there is to it." Nathaniel's grip tightened, just a fraction. "Is that what you tell yourself?" Their eyes locked, the air charged, their breaths mingling. Nathaniel swore he saw Adrian's fingers twitch, saw the hint of something behind those cold blue eyes. Then, just as quickly, Adrian stepped back, severing the moment. "You should get some rest, sir." Nathaniel exhaled slowly, watching Adrian retreat. This wasn't over. Chapter 3. Boundaries meant to be broken. Nathaniel tested Adrian's limits at every turn. Brushing past him in the hall, leaning in too close during dinners, lingering touches that shouldn't have mattered but did. Adrian took it all in stride, until Nathaniel caught him alone in the corridor late at night. "Why are you doing this?" Adrian asked, voice low, eyes burning with something Nathaniel couldn't name. Nathaniel stepped into his space, close enough to feel Adrian's warmth, close enough for their breaths to mingle. "You tell me." Adrian's jaw tensed. "You're playing games." Nathaniel smirked. "Am I?" He let his hand brush against Adrian's wrist, slow, deliberate, teasing. Adrian inhaled sharply, but instead of stepping away, he did something Nathaniel hadn't expected. He grabbed Nathaniel's wrist, flipping the dynamic in an instant. Their bodies were inches apart now, heat crackling between them. Nathaniel felt the strength in Adrian's grip, the barely restrained tension coiled beneath the surface. "Don't test me, Nathaniel," Adrian warned, voice a low growl. Nathaniel smirked, pulse thrumming. "Or what?" Adrian's eyes darkened, his grip tightening just enough to send a thrill through Nathaniel's spine. But instead of answering, Adrian released him and stepped back, exhaling hard. Nathaniel licked his lips, already anticipating the next move. Chapter 4. Collisions and Control. The next time Nathaniel pushed, Adrian snapped. It happened in the study again, where their past always seemed to catch up with them. Nathaniel had cornered Adrian against the bookshelves, not touching but close enough that every breath, every shift in weight felt like a challenge. "You're lying to yourself," Nathaniel murmured. Adrian's hands curled into fists. "And what about you? You came back here knowing exactly what would happen. Nathaniel smirked. Maybe I wanted to see if you'd break first. That did it. In a flash, Adrian's hand shot out, grabbing Nathaniel's tie, yanking him forward. Their chests collided, breaths mingling. Nathaniel's heart slammed against his ribs as Adrian's scent, strong, sharp, intoxicating, filled his lungs. You think you have the upper hand? Adrian's voice was rough, dangerously low. Nathaniel's smirk didn't waver. I think you want this as much as I do. Adrian's grip tightened, and for a breathless second, Nathaniel thought he'd finally cave, finally close the distance. But then Adrian exhaled sharply, releasing him with a forceful shove. Nathaniel staggered back, lips curling. Coward. Adrian's eyes flashed, but he said nothing. Instead, he turned on his heel and walked away. Nathaniel watched him go, pulse hammering, already thinking of how to make him snap again. Chapter 5. The Breaking Point. The next night, the tension boiled over. Nathaniel found Adrian alone in the grand hall, late at night. This time, there were no pretense, no games. Just raw, unspoken history between them. You're running, Nathaniel accused. Adrian turned, eyes flashing. I'm not. Nathaniel closed the distance in 3 strides, grabbing Adrian's wrist. This time, Adrian didn't pull away. You're still lying to yourself, Nathaniel murmured. Adrian's breath hitched. Then, finally, he moved. A sharp pull, a shift of weight, and suddenly Nathaniel was against the wall, Adrian's hand pressed firmly against his chest, pinning him there. Their faces were close. Too close. I hate you, Adrian growled, but his grip on Nathaniel's shirt said otherwise. Nathaniel let out a slow, teasing breath. Liar. Adrian's fingers curled tighter. The air between them was thick, electric, almost suffocating. Then, he moved. Not a kiss. Not yet. But his lips brushed the corner of Nathaniel's mouth, hovering just enough to drive him insane. Nathaniel inhaled sharply, fingers tightening on Adrian's wrist. You're playing with fire. Adrian's breath was hot against his skin. Maybe I want to burn. Silence. Tension. Then, he stepped back, letting go, walking away again. Nathaniel let out a shaky breath, heart pounding. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Chapter 6. The Moment of Truth. The mansion felt unnaturally quiet that evening, as if the walls themselves held their breath. Nathaniel couldn't ignore the undercurrent of tension, the weight of years between him and Adrian that neither of them had dared to address. Adrian moved silently through the room, adjusting the lighting, his movements so controlled, so precise. His every action was measured, but Nathaniel could see the tension in his shoulders, the rigidness of his jaw. Nathaniel had been studying him for far too long. His thoughts a whirlwind of contradictions. There were the memories of their past, carefree moments filled with shared laughs and late-night conversations. And then there was the cold silence that had replaced everything, years of avoidance. But now, seeing Adrian up close again, Nathaniel couldn't deny it. The attraction, the pull between them, was undeniable. It wasn't just the shared history that sparked something deep within him. No, it was the way Adrian's presence seemed to dominate the space, the way his alpha aura made everything feel sharper, more intense. You're still here, Nathaniel finally spoke, his voice low, almost hesitant. Adrian paused in his task, his back still turned. There was a long beat of silence before he responded. I never left, Nathaniel. The words were like a punch to his gut. He never left. Nathaniel stood there, frozen for a moment, before his feet moved him closer, against his will. The distance between them seemed to shrink with every step, the air thickening with the weight of their history. Adrian turned to face him, his eyes meeting Nathaniel's, filled with something unreadable. The tension between them was palpable, thick enough to touch. Nathaniel opened his mouth to speak, but the words died on his tongue. Instead, Adrian's eyes flicked down to Nathaniel's lips, a small, dangerous smile curling on his face. The smile was a challenge. It was everything they hadn't been allowed to explore in the past, everything that had been buried deep, locked away. Nathaniel swallowed hard, his heart hammering in his chest. "What are we doing, Adrian?" Adrian stepped closer, his presence engulfing Nathaniel. The heat between them was immediate, undeniable. The urge to close the distance, to feel the press of Adrian's body against his own, was overwhelming. "I've been waiting for this," Adrian said, his voice thick with something dangerous and raw. "You always knew it, Nathaniel. You always knew I would come back." The words settled heavily between them, and Nathaniel found himself trapped by the intensity of Adrian's gaze. He had always been the more controlled of the two, the alpha who played the game, calculated every move. But in this moment, with Adrian so close, that control slipped through his fingers. Before he could process the thought, Adrian's hand was on his chest, the contact sending a shock of heat through him. "You think I forgot about you? About us?" Adrian's voice dropped to a whisper, his breath warm against Nathaniel's skin. "I never forgot." Nathaniel's pulse quickened. His body reacted before his mind could catch up, every nerve in his body screaming to give in. He reached up, his fingers brushing against Adrian's jaw, the touch almost tentative at first. Adrian's breath hitched at the contact, and before either of them could second-guess themselves, their lips met. The kiss was nothing like what Nathaniel had imagined. There was no softness, no hesitation. Adrian's lips were fierce, demanding, claiming. The heat of it spread through Nathaniel, igniting something deep inside him that he hadn't realized had been dormant all these years. Nathaniel gripped Adrian's shoulder, pulling him closer, his body arching into the touch. The feeling of Adrian's lips against his, the pressure, the heat, it was everything he had craved but refused to acknowledge. Adrian's hand slid to Nathaniel's back, his touch firm, unyielding. A low growl escaped Adrian's throat as their kiss deepened, a sound that rumbled through Nathaniel's chest, sending a jolt of desire through him. It was a reminder of just how powerful Adrian was, how much he had changed, how much they both had changed. As their kiss broke, both of them breathing heavily, Adrian's eyes were dark with intensity. "You have no idea how much I've wanted this," he whispered, his voice hoarse with emotion. Nathaniel's lips parted as he tried to catch his breath, his hands resting on Adrian's chest, feeling the rapid beat of his heart beneath his fingers. "Then why now?" Adrian leaned down, brushing his lips against Nathaniel's ear, his voice low. "Because we've both been waiting too long. And I can't wait any longer." The rawness in Adrian's tone, the emotion buried beneath the surface, sent a shiver down Nathaniel's spine. He knew they were crossing a line, one that had been drawn long ago, one that neither of them had dared to cross. But now, with the power dynamic shifting and their roles blurred, it felt inevitable. Without another word, Adrian pulled Nathaniel into another kiss, this one slow, almost agonizingly so, as if savoring the moment they had both longed for. Nathaniel's hand slid up Adrian's neck, pulling him closer, feeling the warmth of his skin beneath his fingertips. There was no going back now. The kiss deepened, the chemistry undeniable, their bodies pressing closer as the tension between them reached a boiling point. Nathaniel felt his control slipping, but for the first time in years, he didn't want to fight it. He wanted this, he needed this. When they finally pulled away, both of them breathless, their foreheads rested together. The silence between them was filled with something deeper than words. It was understanding. It was desire. "You're mine now," Adrian said softly, his breath mingling with Nathaniel's. Nathaniel's heart pounded in his chest, his body still aching from the intensity of the kiss. "I never stopped being yours," he whispered back, his voice hoarse. The world outside seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of them, locked in an embrace that neither of them could undo. Chapter 7. The Push and Pull. Nathaniel didn't expect the whirlwind of emotions that hit him after the kiss. He had been so sure of himself before, the heir to a powerful family, a man who commanded respect. But now, with Adrian standing so close, the weight of their years apart and the years of tension between them was overwhelming. Adrian took a step back, though his hand lingered on Nathaniel's arm, his fingers tracing the line of his sleeve as if unwilling to break the touch. "You've changed," Adrian said, his voice almost reverent, his eyes scanning Nathaniel as if trying to memorize every detail. Nathaniel's pulse still raced, but his mind fought to regain control. "I never wanted to change," he replied, his voice unsteady. Adrian chuckled softly, a sound that was both warm and bitter. We never really had a choice, did we? The space between them felt heavy, as if the years apart had woven an unspoken barrier they couldn't easily tear down. But Nathaniel could feel the old connection, the pull that had always existed between them, slowly growing stronger. I want to pick up where we left off, Nathaniel said quietly, his gaze locking with Adrian's. Adrian's eyes flickered with something deep, something that Nathaniel couldn't quite place. He had seen Adrian's calculated, controlled side before, but now, the rawness beneath it was becoming more and more apparent. What if I don't know how to go back? Adrian's voice was low, a quiet vulnerability hidden beneath the layers of his usual composure. Nathaniel didn't have an answer. He only knew that the intensity between them had shifted, and he wasn't sure how to navigate it. But he couldn't stop the pull that was drawing him closer, couldn't ignore the heat building in his chest. Before either of them could speak again, Adrian reached for him, his hand sliding to Nathaniel's waist, pulling him in with a force that took his breath away. This time, the kiss was deeper, more urgent, as if they had both waited too long. Nathaniel's fingers curled into Adrian's shirt, tugging him even closer, their bodies pressed flush against each other. The warmth of Adrian's body against his sent a surge of desire through Nathaniel, and his mind raced with the memories of their past. Adrian pulled away first, his chest rising and falling with each breath. "We can't pretend this is just about business," he said, his voice strained. "No," Nathaniel agreed, his lips still tingling from their kiss. "This is something else." Chapter 8. The Consequence of Desire. The next few days were a blur of complicated emotions. Nathaniel couldn't focus on the work he'd come back to do, not with Adrian's presence constantly lingering in his mind. Every glance, every touch, seemed to pull him further into the web they'd once shared. Adrian was always near, always so close. But their interactions were brief, filled with the weight of unsaid things. It was as if they were both walking on a tightrope, unsure of whether the other would fall or catch them. One evening, after a long day of meetings and corporate decisions, Nathaniel found himself standing alone in the hallway, staring out of the large windows at the sprawling estate. He could see Adrian in the distance, moving through the shadows with his usual grace, but there was something different about him now. His posture was more tense, more aware, as if he was waiting for something to happen. When Nathaniel approached, Adrian didn't turn at first. It was only when Nathaniel was a mere few feet away that Adrian's eyes flickered to him, his gaze intense. "You can't keep running from this," Nathaniel said, his voice low. Adrian's lips parted as if to say something, but instead, he moved toward Nathaniel. He stopped just before him, their bodies almost touching, the heat between them undeniable. Adrian's hand lifted slowly, as if testing the waters, before resting gently on Nathaniel's chest. Nathaniel's breath caught in his throat. "I'm not running from this," Adrian murmured, his voice thick with something between frustration and longing. "I just don't know where to begin." Nathaniel closed the distance between them, his hand reaching up to cup Adrian's jaw, the contact electrifying. "Start with the truth." Adrian's eyes darkened, and without another word, he kissed Nathaniel again, his lips claiming his with a force that spoke volumes. Nathaniel responded in kind, his hands threading through Adrian's hair, pulling him closer. This kiss was different. This one held all the years of restraint, all the tension that had built between them. It was as if they were both desperate to let go, to give in to the feelings they'd buried for so long. When they finally pulled away, both of them breathless and flushed, Nathaniel spoke first. "We can't keep pretending this doesn't mean something." Adrian's hand slid from Nathaniel's chest to his back, pulling him into an embrace. "I know," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "But we'll have to figure out what that something is. Together." Chapter 9. A Moment of Clarity. The tension between them only grew in the days that followed. Nathaniel could feel Adrian's eyes on him, could feel the weight of his presence even when they weren't directly interacting. Every touch, every glance, carried more meaning now. One evening, after a particularly long meeting, Adrian found Nathaniel in the garden, standing by the fountain. The moonlight cast a soft glow on his face, making him look almost ethereal. Adrian couldn't help but watch him, his heart thundering in his chest. "I never meant to hurt you," Adrian said, his voice carrying the weight of years of regret. Nathaniel turned to face him, his expression unreadable. You didn't. But I did, Adrian insisted, his voice breaking slightly. I left. I walked away when you needed me most. And now, I don't know how to make it right. Nathaniel's gaze softened, and he stepped closer, the distance between them closing once again. You came back. That's enough. Without another word, Adrian pulled him into his arms, his grip firm but gentle. Nathaniel melted into the embrace, feeling the heat of Adrian's body against his. For a moment, there were no words, only the feeling of being held, of being seen. And then Adrian's lips were on his again, the kiss soft but filled with an unspoken promise. Nathaniel responded immediately, his hands moving to Adrian's back, pulling him closer, needing the closeness more than he cared to admit. Chapter 10. A Shift in Power. It wasn't until the following week that the power dynamics between them truly began to shift. Adrian was no longer just the butler of the Hayes family. He was something else now, an equal, an alpha who had returned to claim what he had never truly left behind. Nathaniel found himself in a meeting late one evening, going over company documents when Adrian appeared in the doorway. His eyes locked with Nathaniel's, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The air seemed to crackle with the unspoken understanding between them. I need you to stay, Nathaniel said, his voice steady despite the rush of emotion in his chest. Adrian stepped forward, his presence filling the room, the tension between them palpable. I'm not going anywhere. The words were a declaration, a promise. And Nathaniel found himself believing them in a way he hadn't expected. When Adrian reached him, their hands found each other, the touch electric. They stood there, their eyes locked, no words needed. The bond between them had changed, but it was stronger than ever. And in that moment, Nathaniel realized they were no longer playing by the rules that had once defined their lives. This wasn't about power, not anymore. It was about them, about the raw, undeniable chemistry that had always existed between them. Chapter 11. The Last Test. Adrian and Nathaniel were no longer avoiding their feelings. They had crossed a line, and there was no turning back. But that didn't mean the road ahead would be easy. The company had demanded Nathaniel's attention, but his thoughts kept drifting to Adrian. They had both been so wrapped up in their past, in their roles, but now it was about moving forward, together. One night, as they sat in the study, Nathaniel couldn't keep his eyes off Adrian. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting shadows on Adrian's face, making him seem both dangerous and irresistible. Nathaniel, Adrian murmured, his voice low and thick with desire. What are we doing? Nathaniel swallowed, his heart pounding in his chest. We're moving forward. Without waiting for a response, Nathaniel pulled Adrian closer, the kiss that followed deep and consuming. Their bodies pressed together, the heat between them almost unbearable. Adrian's hands moved with purpose, tracing Nathaniel's body with a familiarity that sent sparks flying. This time, there was no hesitation. Chapter 12. Unbreakable Bonds. The next morning, everything felt different. The world had shifted in subtle ways, but the bond between them was undeniable. Their connection was more than physical. It was emotional, it was raw, and it was real. Adrian stood by the window, watching Nathaniel as he worked, the quiet understanding between them settling into something deeper, something unbreakable. Nathaniel looked up, meeting Adrian's gaze. We don't have to figure everything out right now. Adrian smiled, his eyes softening. I know. But we will. The uncertainty of the past no longer loomed over them. What they had was theirs, and that was all that mattered. Chapter 13. Uncharted Territory. Nathaniel had never been one to let his guard down, but with Adrian, everything felt different. It was as if the walls he had spent years building were crumbling with every look, every touch. They found themselves together again in the quiet solitude of Nathaniel's private office, the evening sun casting a golden glow through the curtains. The tension between them was palpable, the air thick with unsaid words. Adrian was standing by the window, his gaze distant, as if he were struggling with the same internal conflict that Nathaniel couldn't seem to shake. I never imagined we'd end up like this, Nathaniel said quietly, breaking the silence. Adrian's shoulders tensed slightly, but he didn't turn around. Neither did I. But here we are. Nathaniel rose from his chair, moving slowly toward Adrian, the weight of their past hanging heavily between them. He reached out, his hand gently brushing against Adrian's arm, a simple touch, but it spoke volumes. When Adrian finally turned to face him, his eyes were dark with unspoken emotions. "You can't just pretend this is easy, Nathaniel. We're both changing, and I'm not sure where that leaves us." Nathaniel's heart skipped a beat. "I'm not pretending. I don't have all the answers, but I'm not letting this go." His voice was steady, but his emotions were anything but. Adrian's gaze softened, and for a brief moment, Nathaniel thought he saw something vulnerable in his eyes, something real. Without a word, Adrian closed the distance between them, his hand reaching for Nathaniel's. In that moment, nothing else mattered. The world outside seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of them in the quiet space of their shared tension. As Adrian's lips met Nathaniel's, it was as though time itself paused. The kiss was slow, deliberate, and filled with a longing that neither of them had fully acknowledged until now. When they finally broke apart, their foreheads rested against each other, both of them breathing heavily. "I don't know what this is," Adrian whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "It doesn't matter," Nathaniel replied, his hand sliding to the back of Adrian's neck, pulling him back into another kiss. This time, it was deeper, more urgent, as if they both knew that there was no turning back from this moment. Chapter 14. Colliding Worlds. The days that followed were a mix of uncertainty and passion. Nathaniel and Adrian found themselves tangled in a delicate dance, their chemistry undeniable but their emotions still raw. It seemed that every moment together brought them closer, yet the walls they had built over the years didn't crumble as easily as they had hoped. At a formal gathering one evening, Nathaniel found himself observing Adrian from across the room. Adrian's posture was perfect, as always, exuding confidence and poise. But Nathaniel noticed the subtle tension in his shoulders, the way his gaze flickered nervously when their eyes met. Adrian was always in control, but Nathaniel could sense the cracks forming in that armor. Later that evening, Nathaniel followed Adrian to the balcony, where the cool night air felt refreshing after the warmth of the crowded room. "You've been avoiding me," Nathaniel said quietly, stepping closer. Adrian didn't answer immediately. Instead, he leaned on the balcony railing, staring out into the distance. His voice, when it came, was soft but laced with frustration. "I can't keep pretending everything is fine. It's not just us, Nathaniel. It's everything that's happened. The business. Our families. I don't know how to make all of this work." Nathaniel's heart ached at the vulnerability in Adrian's words. He had always admired Adrian's strength, but in that moment, he saw the cracks, the uncertainty that had always been buried deep within. Stepping forward, Nathaniel placed a hand on Adrian's shoulder, turning him to face him. "We'll figure it out. Together." Adrian's eyes met his, a storm of emotions swirling in them. Before Nathaniel could say anything more, Adrian reached up, pulling him into a kiss. This kiss was different from the others. It wasn't desperate, but it was filled with a deep, raw need, an unspoken promise that they were both ready to face whatever came next. Chapter 15. Breaking Barriers. The following days were filled with whispered conversations and stolen glances. Nathaniel and Adrian were no longer pretending to be just business partners. The bond between them had shifted, and neither of them could ignore it anymore. They met in secret, sometimes in Nathaniel's office, other times in hidden corners of the estate, each encounter more intense than the last. The tension between them was palpable, and every touch seemed to ignite something deeper within them. One evening, as they sat together in the quiet of Nathaniel's study, the air thick with unspoken words, Nathaniel couldn't help but reach out, brushing a finger gently along Adrian's jaw. Adrian turned to face him, his expression unreadable, but Nathaniel could see the longing in his eyes. "I don't want to fight this anymore," Nathaniel said, his voice low, almost a whisper. Adrian's gaze softened. "Then don't." Before Nathaniel could respond, Adrian leaned in, capturing his lips in a kiss that was as tender as it was urgent. The moment their lips met, everything else seemed to fade away. The weight of their past, the complexities of their relationship, none of it mattered in that moment. Their kiss deepened, the passion between them undeniable. Nathaniel's hands roamed to Adrian's back, pulling him closer, feeling the heat of his body against his own. Adrian responded in kind, his hands sliding up Nathaniel's shirt, fingertips grazing over the skin beneath. The kiss grew more heated, the tension between them reaching a boiling point. But just as quickly as it had escalated, Adrian pulled back, his chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. "We're pushing the limits, Nathaniel." "I know," Nathaniel replied, his voice thick with desire. "But I don't want to stop." Chapter 16. The Descent. Adrian's words echoed in Nathaniel's mind for days. They both knew what they were doing, and yet, neither of them was willing to stop. They were falling into something deeper than either of them had anticipated, and every moment spent together made it harder to pull away. One night, after a particularly intense meeting, Nathaniel found himself alone in his office, his thoughts consumed by Adrian. He had tried to focus on the work that needed to be done, but his mind kept drifting back to their last encounter, the way Adrian had kissed him with such desperation. Before he could lose himself in his thoughts any longer, there was a soft knock at the door. Adrian stood there, looking almost too perfect in the dim light. His eyes were dark, his expression unreadable, but Nathaniel could feel the tension radiating from him. "I couldn't stay away," Adrian said quietly, stepping into the room. Without a word, Nathaniel stood and crossed the room, closing the distance between them. He could feel the electricity between them, the pull that had been building since the moment they reconnected. As they came together, the kiss was slow at first, exploratory, as if they were both testing the waters. But soon, the kiss deepened, both of them losing themselves in the moment. Nathaniel's hands roamed to Adrian's shirt, tugging at the fabric as if he couldn't get close enough. Adrian's hands slid around Nathaniel's waist, pulling him into a tight embrace. The world outside seemed to disappear as they fell into each other, the heat of their bodies pressing together. They were no longer holding back, no longer pretending they weren't deeply entangled in this connection. When they finally broke apart, their breaths ragged, Nathaniel could see the raw intensity in Adrian's eyes. "We can't go back, Nathaniel." "No," Nathaniel replied, his voice hoarse. "We never will." Chapter 17. Bound by Fate. It had been weeks since that night in Nathaniel's office, but the connection between him and Adrian had only deepened. Their bond had become something more than just physical. It was emotional, it was undeniable, and it was something neither of them could escape. But despite the pull they shared, there were still things left unsaid, things left unresolved. The world they lived in was filled with complications: business, family, expectations. One afternoon, as they sat together in the quiet of Nathaniel's private study, Adrian finally spoke the words Nathaniel had been dreading. "We can't keep living in the shadows, Nathaniel." Nathaniel's heart raced, his mind spinning. "What are you saying?" Adrian met his gaze, his expression soft but serious. "We need to figure out what this is. What we are. If we're really going to do this, we need to stop hiding." Nathaniel looked at him, his heart swelling with something he couldn't quite name. "I'm not afraid, Adrian." Adrian's hand found his, their fingers intertwining. "Neither am I." Together, they knew they were ready to face whatever came next, together. The bond they shared was unbreakable, and no matter what the future held, they were ready to face it side by side. Chapter 18. Torn Allegiances. The weeks following their declaration were a mix of euphoria and unease. Nathaniel and Adrian had found solace in each other's arms, but the weight of the world outside their bubble seemed to grow heavier with every passing day. Adrian had pulled away slightly after their last encounter, his mind seemingly consumed by something unspoken. Nathaniel felt it, a change in the air between them, a shift he couldn't ignore. It all came to a head one evening, during a business dinner at a prestigious restaurant. They sat across from one another, their usual easy communication now tainted by the tension that had begun to grow. Nathaniel's fingers traced the rim of his glass as Adrian kept his gaze averted, eyes distant, lost in thought. "Adrian." Nathaniel's voice broke the silence. "What's going on? You've been distant. Is there something you're not telling me?" Adrian's eyes flickered briefly to Nathaniel before quickly darting away, and that was all it took. Nathaniel felt a surge of unease flood his chest. There was something wrong, and Adrian was hiding it. I don't know how to say this," Adrian finally whispered, his voice strained. "I've been keeping something from you. Something important." Nathaniel's heart clenched. What What could be so important that you couldn't tell me? Adrian took a long breath, his hands trembling slightly as he set his glass down on the table. Nathaniel, the truth is, my family doesn't know about us. And they won't accept it. I've been under pressure to secure alliances, and they expect me to marry a woman from a powerful family to solidify our standing. The words hit Nathaniel like a blow. He sat back, momentarily stunned, unable to process the implications. Adrian was lying to his family about their relationship, pretending as though nothing had changed between them, all for the sake of appearances. Are you serious? Nathaniel's voice was cold, though his heart pounded in his chest. You're still planning to marry someone else? Adrian winced, the guilt written all over his face. It's not that simple. You don't understand the pressure, Nathaniel. If I refuse this marriage, I could lose everything. My family's trust, my place in the business, the power we've built over the years. Nathaniel stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. His mind raced as anger, betrayal, and confusion warred within him. You think I don't understand pressure? You think I don't know what it's like to be torn between duty and desire? But this is different. This is about us, Adrian. You can't just keep lying to me. Adrian reached out, but Nathaniel stepped back, shaking his head. I don't need your excuses. You've been keeping me in the dark while you continue to play your part, pretending none of this matters. The words stung, and Adrian looked pained, but his voice remained firm. You think I wanted this? You think I wanted to hurt you? I don't know what to think anymore, Nathaniel muttered, his voice breaking slightly. You've made your choice. You've made it clear where your priorities lie. Adrian's eyes softened, a flicker of regret flashing across his face. That's not fair, Nathaniel. You know I care about you. This isn't about not wanting you. It's about surviving in a world that doesn't forgive mistakes. You should have told me this from the start, Nathaniel said, his voice tight with emotion. Instead, you've been using me as a shield to hide behind. Adrian's face contorted with frustration. You're not a shield. You're everything to me. The words hung between them, heavy and laden with unspoken meaning. Nathaniel stood there for a moment, his breath shallow as he fought to keep his composure. Then, with a final glance at Adrian, he turned and walked away, the sound of his footsteps echoing in the silent restaurant. Chapter 19. Broken Bonds. Nathaniel didn't know where he was going, just that he had to get away from Adrian. He couldn't breathe in that moment, couldn't understand how everything they had built could fall apart so quickly. The city lights blurred as he walked through the quiet streets, his thoughts consumed with anger and hurt. What was the point of everything if Adrian couldn't be honest with him? What was the point of this connection, of this bond, if it was all just a lie? His phone buzzed in his pocket, and he glanced at it. Adrian. Of course. He didn't answer. Nathaniel wandered for hours, the cold night air doing little to numb the turmoil inside him. Eventually, he found himself standing in front of his apartment, the building looming above him like a reminder of everything he wanted to escape. As he entered the lobby, his phone buzzed again. This time, he reluctantly answered, knowing it was Adrian. Nathaniel, please listen to me, Adrian's voice came through the line, raw and pleading. I never meant to hurt you. I didn't know how to say it. I don't need to hear any more excuses, Adrian, Nathaniel replied, his voice thick with emotion. You've already made your choice. I'm not going to be some secret anymore. Please, don't say that. You're not a secret. You never were. Nathaniel swallowed hard, trying to hold back the tears threatening to fall. Then why do I feel like I'm the one who's been left behind? There was a long silence on the other end of the line, and for a moment, Nathaniel thought Adrian had hung up. But then Adrian's voice came again, quieter this time. I'm not giving up on us, Nathaniel. I swear. Nathaniel's heart ached at the words, but he couldn't let himself be dragged back into the same cycle. Not now. Not when he had finally started to see the truth. I need time, Nathaniel said quietly. I need to figure out what I want. I'll wait, Adrian responded. I'll wait for as long as it takes. Nathaniel's breath hitched, but he didn't say anything else before hanging up. The world around him felt quieter, emptier, as if everything had lost its meaning. Chapter 20. The Storm Within. The following days were a blur of confusion and heartache. Nathaniel tried to focus on his work, but his mind constantly drifted back to Adrian, the man who had promised him everything, yet couldn't find the courage to give him the one thing he needed most, the truth. Every corner he turned seemed to remind him of Adrian, every place they had been, every moment they had shared. Nathaniel knew that if he didn't confront this, he would be consumed by it. It was the evening of an important business gala that Nathaniel found himself face to face with Adrian once again. The elegant ballroom was filled with guests, the air thick with conversation and clinking glasses. But as soon as their eyes met, everything else faded away. Adrian moved towards him, his eyes intense, his posture tense. Nathaniel could see the fight in him, the desperation. "I've made a decision," Adrian said, his voice barely above a whisper. Nathaniel raised an eyebrow. "What kind of decision?" Adrian stepped closer, his hand reaching for Nathaniel's. "I'm done living in fear. I won't let you go." Nathaniel's heart raced. For a moment, he wanted to believe him. He wanted to throw caution to the wind and embrace whatever future Adrian was offering. But the hurt was still fresh, the betrayal still too raw. "Do you even know what you're asking of me?" Nathaniel replied, his voice trembling slightly. "Do you even know how much I've sacrificed to be with you? How much I've had to ignore just to keep us, alive?" "I know," Adrian said quietly. "And I'm sorry. But I'm not willing to lose you. Not again." Nathaniel's breath caught in his throat. Adrian's words hit him like a wave, a torrent of emotion that threatened to drown him. But before he could speak, the sound of a phone ringing interrupted them both. Adrian's phone. He glanced at the screen and then back at Nathaniel, his expression unreadable. Nathaniel saw the tension in his face, the hesitation. But before he could react, Adrian turned and answered the call, his voice low and controlled. Nathaniel stood there, his heart sinking as he realized that the man he had trusted was still tangled in a web of lies and secrets. The storm within him was only growing stronger. Chapter 21. The Breaking Point. The tension between Nathaniel and Adrian was palpable. Each conversation felt like walking on fragile glass, every word a crack that threatened to split them apart. Nathaniel tried to keep his composure, his emotions teetering on the edge of destruction. He had trusted Adrian, had given so much of himself, only to be faced with betrayal and lies. But despite everything, he couldn't shake the love he felt for him. Adrian's constant apologies and promises began to feel like empty gestures. Nathaniel had grown tired of hearing that he wasn't ready to give up, tired of seeing the hesitation in Adrian's eyes, as if he wasn't sure of where his heart truly lay. Nathaniel had given him the space he needed to figure things out, but Adrian was still living in the shadows of his family's expectations. One evening, Nathaniel stood by the window of his apartment, staring out into the city. He could feel the weight of the decision pressing on him. Should he walk away? Should he let go of everything they had built, everything they had fought for? Or should he trust Adrian once more, despite the broken promises? Just then, Adrian appeared at the door, his face drawn with exhaustion. His eyes met Nathaniel's, and for a moment, there was nothing but silence between them. But the weight of their emotions hung heavily in the air. "Nathaniel, I need to tell you everything." Adrian's voice was tight, almost pleading. "I can't keep running from this. I can't keep pretending that what I want doesn't matter." Nathaniel's pulse quickened. This was it. This was the moment when everything would either break or heal. Chapter 22. The Truth Unveiled. Adrian stepped into the room, closing the door behind him with a soft click. He walked toward Nathaniel, the distance between them stretching like a chasm, but neither of them made a move to close it. Adrian swallowed, his hands trembling slightly as he reached for Nathaniel's. "I've been afraid, Nathaniel. Afraid of losing my family, my legacy, the life I've known," Adrian confessed, his voice cracking with the weight of his words. "But in the process, I've lost myself. I've lost you. And I can't live like this anymore." Nathaniel's breath caught in his throat. "What are you saying, Adrian? What do you want?" Adrian's gaze was unwavering, a fire in his eyes that Nathaniel hadn't seen before. "I want you. Only you. No more lies, no more playing pretend. I know what I have to do, and I know it's not going to be easy. But I'm done trying to be someone I'm not." The vulnerability in Adrian's eyes was enough to make Nathaniel's heart ache. He had always seen the strength in Adrian, but now, in this moment, he saw the depth of his pain. Adrian had been trapped in a life that didn't fit him, and Nathaniel knew that he had been the one to help him realize that. "Then why didn't you say this earlier?" Nathaniel whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I was scared," Adrian admitted, his voice raw. "Scared that you would leave me. Scared that I would lose everything I've worked for. But the truth is, I don't care about any of that anymore. All I care about is you." The words hung in the air, their meaning sinking deep into Nathaniel's soul. He had longed for this moment, but he had also feared it. Adrian was finally choosing him, choosing their love, but the journey ahead would still be fraught with challenges. Nathaniel took a shaky breath, his heart pounding as he reached out to touch Adrian's face. "If you're sure about this, if you're sure about us, then I'm willing to try. But it can't be just words. I need to see it in your actions." Adrian nodded, his eyes filled with resolve. "I'll prove it to you, Nathaniel. Every day. I'll fight for us." For the first time in weeks, Nathaniel felt a spark of hope. The pieces of their fractured relationship were starting to come together, and for the first time, he allowed himself to believe in a future with Adrian. Chapter 23. A Moment of Release. The next few days were a whirlwind. Adrian began taking action, showing Nathaniel through his decisions and actions that he was committed to their love. He made the necessary arrangements to distance himself from the pressures of his family, and his first step was to publicly distance himself from the marriage contract his parents had set up for him. Adrian had planned an intimate evening for the two of them, one where they could finally find peace in each other's arms. The night was warm, the soft glow of candlelight casting flickering shadows across the room. They stood in silence for a moment, the air thick with unspoken words. Adrian reached for Nathaniel, his hands gentle yet firm as he pulled him closer. Nathaniel's heart raced as he looked into Adrian's eyes, seeing the vulnerability and intensity there. Adrian's lips met his, soft and tentative at first, but it didn't take long for the kiss to deepen, both of them hungry for the connection they had been denied for so long. Nathaniel's fingers tangled in Adrian's hair as their kiss deepened, each touch a release of the tension that had built up between them. The passion between them was undeniable, raw and unfiltered. They had both been starved for this, for each other, and now, they were finally allowing themselves to fully embrace the love that had always been there. Adrian's hands moved down Nathaniel's body, his touch reverent and slow, as if he was savoring every inch of him. Nathaniel's breath hitched as Adrian's hands slid beneath his shirt, the warmth of his skin sending jolts of electricity through his body. He pulled away from the kiss, his chest heaving with the need for more. "Are you sure about this?" Adrian asked, his voice low and steady. "Because once we go down this path, there's no turning back." Nathaniel's gaze locked with his, and in that moment, he knew there was no turning back. "I'm sure. I've always been sure." With that, they came together again, their connection deeper than it had ever been before. Their passion was a release, a culmination of everything they had been through, everything they had fought for. In each other's arms, they found not only solace but the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter that was theirs to write together. Chapter 24. The Road Ahead. The weeks following that night were filled with challenges. Adrian's family was furious when they learned of his decision to break the engagement, and Nathaniel knew that they would face even more battles ahead. But the bond between them was stronger than ever. Nathaniel had never seen Adrian fight so fiercely for something, and he admired the courage it took to stand up for their love. As they navigated the turbulent waters of public scrutiny, Nathaniel and Adrian grew closer. They learned to communicate better, to trust each other in ways they never had before. The road ahead was uncertain, but they were no longer walking it alone. Nathaniel looked at Adrian one evening, as they stood on the balcony overlooking the city. "We still have a long way to go, don't we?" Adrian smiled, his eyes soft with affection. "Yes. But we'll face it together. I promise." In that moment, Nathaniel knew that no matter what the future held, they would face it as a team. And that, more than anything, was enough. Chapter 25. The Future We Choose. Months passed, and things began to settle. Adrian had successfully navigated the fallout with his family, and although their relationship was still complicated, he had made it clear that Nathaniel was his priority. Nathaniel, in turn, had learned to trust Adrian again, and together they built a life that was theirs. A life free from the constraints of expectations and lies. As they stood together, looking out at the horizon, Nathaniel knew that they had finally found their place in the world. The challenges they had faced had only made their love stronger, and now they were ready to face whatever came next. "You were right," Nathaniel said softly, his hand resting on Adrian's chest. "This was worth fighting for." Adrian smiled, his eyes filled with a warmth that Nathaniel had never seen before. "And we'll keep fighting, for as long as it takes." In that moment, they knew the future was theirs to shape. And no matter what, they would face it, side by side.